started with today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not to substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professionals before doing any fasting, changing your diet in any way, taking or adjusting any medications or supplements, or adopting any treatment plan for a health problem. The use of any other products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Any information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All right, and now we'll get started with today's episode.
Welcome back to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri Lance, and I'm joined today with Coach Bethany. How are you, Bethany?
I'm doing great, Terri. How are you?
I'm good. Well, Bethany, I know that as we talked a little bit about what we wanted to share today, you had a great idea to really talk about kind of the best practices that really help people to be successful. So I am going to toss it over to you because I know you've put some thought into how we could help people.
I have, and I have to credit some of my clients with this topic because several clients have asked during their intake session with me at the end, when I turn it over to them and I say, do you have any questions? Several of them have asked, what makes someone successful in this process? And I always think it's such a brilliant question because it shows that they've put thought into how they are going to show up. And also because people know the ways that they have tried and been unsuccessful. So I think it's a really thoughtful question to ask. What is it? What can I do? So the first thing that I want to throw out there is I've noticed that people who are successful in their fasting journey, coaching clients specifically, they come to meetings regularly, regardless of how well they stuck to their plan. They come if they have stuck to their plan perfectly. They come if they've quote unquote, overachieved. They've come if they have not gotten any fasting done and they have done some what we call off-roading food-wise. They come to that coaching meeting and they are transparent with what's been going on. And I always say to people who come to coaching meetings who have not been acting in accordance with their plan, I always say, I'm really impressed by the fact that you're here, because that's harder. It's harder to show up for a meeting and say, hey, I did not do what I said I was going to do. That's a lot harder than coming and saying, yep, give me a gold star. I've done my 336s and I also did a 24 and XYZ. So that is one thing that I have noticed that makes people very successful. And it goes hand in hand with consistency.
Absolutely. And I take it also to mean showing up for yourself. They're not showing up for you. They're showing up for themselves, even though they're maybe struggling a little bit or, like you said, just kind of off-roading for whatever reason. It reminds me of when I was a therapist and I worked in a large office. And I would get a phone message, a little piece of paper with a phone message on it. And it would say, Dr. Lance, your 4 o'clock canceled today. They're too anxious to come in. And as a psychologist, I thought, isn't that when I can best help? Come and show up for yourself when you're struggling. Get the support that you need when you're struggling, not just when you're doing well and thriving. Share when it's difficult, because that's where you need the most support.
That's exactly what I say to my coaching clients, that a coach is useful even in the best of times. But especially when you're struggling, why not use the experience of someone who has gone through it, which all of our coaches have, and also who have seen others go through it? Use that experience. We are there to help you navigate that time.
Absolutely.
Another thing that I've noticed that people who are successful in this journey do, and this is very specific, okay? But I want to put it out there because it's both specific and it's common. And for our community, for the demographic in our community, I think it's very relevant. They don't finish their kids' plates or their grandchildren's plates if they're watching them. They stop doing that if that has been a habit, whether it's that they get containers that they can store it in or they get more comfortable with the idea of food waste. They no longer use themselves, their own bodies as kind of the cleanup crew after their kids. Terri, do you have any experience with clients who have broken that habit?
Bethany, it's funny that you say that. I can't think of specific examples that we've talked really in detail about that, but it is a brilliant piece that you're identifying. And you might be familiar with one of my favorite little catchphrases of "that's not my food." And I always encourage people, what is your food? And focus on just eating your food. And to me, this really extrapolates to the food that's left on your kid's plate or your grandchildren's plate or food that your teenager has on the counter. That's not your food. And I know it's a little more complicated than this with food, but I say, look, if your grandkids were staying with you for the weekend, would you use their toothbrush? No, because it's not your toothbrush. Would you wear their pajamas? No, because they're not your pajamas. So really making that about that is their food. And as you highlighted, Bethany, I think the reason so many of us have learned to do this is we feel bad wasting food, throwing something away. It's waste at this point anyway. Is it going to go on your waste, literally, or is it going to go into the trash? So this is a perfect example of a success tool.
I've seen another example of this, and it's when people are gifted treats or candies. They're gifted or they're brought into the office and people feel guilty about not consuming them. Well, it's not going to really help anyone if you consume them. As you said, it's waste either way. So along those lines, another thing I've noticed is people who have success in this journey, they are willing to, for a certain amount of time, not a long time, maybe 2 weeks max, they're willing to write down what they are eating. It's not that they're logging macros or counting calories or using any kind of app. They're jotting it down either on a piece of paper or on, a simple app on their phone. And they're just bringing awareness to what they are consuming. Because I cannot tell you the number of times I've had an intake session with someone and I say, okay, what do you eat on a regular basis? And they list really supportive, healthy foods. And then once we really dig in, especially when they start writing down what they're eating, what they discover is maybe most of what they're eating are supportive foods, but there are also 3 times a day outside of those meal times when they might be consuming a drink that's the equivalent of eating a cupcake, or they might be dipping into a candy bowl. So bringing awareness to what they eat is another behavior that I've seen can help make people successful.
I love your emphasis on bringing awareness to it without becoming rigidly wedded to it. Some people take this to mean every single bite and slice and everything has to be documented. And for some of us, that may be necessary. But it's really about being consciously aware so that we're not kind of erroneously consuming things that we don't even pay attention to and then wondering why things aren't working well for us.
Exactly. So one client, she actually had a pretty good laugh after doing this, which I thought was a really beautiful response to this. But she had a good laugh and she said, I had no idea I ate M&Ms every day. She said, if you had asked me, I would have said, no, not me. I don't do that. But she realized in writing down what she ate that over the course of 9 days, she had eaten M&Ms every single day. So it really can bring awareness to what you are consuming in addition to what you thought. Another one I love, and this is something that we do very early on in the coaching process at TFM, is we define very clear measurements of success. We decide how we are going to track success, and people who see results track those consistently. Now, I'm a huge fan of objective data. It does not mean that subjective is irrelevant. So for people who do not like to use the scale, not everyone has a relationship with the scale that's productive. I would say another alternative to an objective measurement might be circumference measurements. It might be measuring with a tape measure around your waist and your hips. It might be body fat percentage. I've even seen people use the same pair of pants as kind of their litmus test for how they're doing. That's a little less objective because, of course, it's dependent on how you are perceiving, but you can feel when a pair of pants is fitting more loosely. So the people who are successful, I've noticed, track those very consistently.
I love that one, Bethany, especially because for so many of us, when our primary objective data is the scale, we have a lot of emotion connected with that. And I'm not someone who weighs myself hardly ever, but I certainly know when my body's changing. I know because that pair of pants doesn't fit or my shirts are looser in a certain area. I know what's happening in my body, even when I don't necessarily have a number of pounds to connect with it. And so that idea of using something consistently so that you know how you're doing.
I have 2 clients who use this. And for one, we call it the denim shorts check-in in the point of the coaching session where I say, do you want to report any objective data changes? And she says, oh, the denim shorts check-in. And then for another client, it's a pair of maroon velvet pants that she has had for years and years that she pulls out every holiday season. So it does not have to be the scale, but I think that it should be something that helps you track your progress along the way.
I love it. Someone could say, I'm 2 inches away from the denim shorts working just right. I love it. Well, Bethany, one of my best practices for success is a little less specific and a little more kind of conceptual, but it's about setting boundaries. And I think it's important for all of us for real success to work on 2 types of boundaries. Interpersonal boundaries. So setting boundaries with other people in our life that, if they're eating snack food, maybe they eat it in the other room, or they warn me before they bring it into the room or something. But setting boundaries so that maybe they don't bring me that food or don't offer it to me or don't use food as a way to connect with me. So first one, interpersonal. And then the other one is intrapersonal, within ourselves. Some people, when I talk about this, they're pretty familiar with their need to set interpersonal ones, the ones with other people in their lives, but they hadn't really thought much about their own boundaries with themselves. Our sneaky snake brain can really talk us into things if we don't have clear internal boundaries that we're willing to follow to keep ourselves on track and make choices for ourselves that help us get where we're going.
Terri, what you said earlier about that's not my food, that to me is an example of an intrapersonal boundary. It's recognizing what is mine versus, what am I going to choose to engage in versus not.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I hadn't even tied it back to that. And I think for some of us, it then becomes, it's not that I don't want that food or wouldn't enjoy that food. It's a boundary for me because I want specific outcomes. I want food freedom, or I want less inflammation, or I want better blood sugar control. I want greater fat percentage loss. That's where the personal boundaries come from. It's not that I don't want it. I choose not to engage it right now because I want these other things more.
I love that one. Another conceptual one that I've noticed, and this is really tough. And to be honest, this is really something that I am challenged by chronically, which is people who have success getting to their goals and maintaining the success they've had. They get comfortable, or they at least accept living in what I call the in-between. You've left your previous habits behind and you're not yet at your goal. And so in a way that can be exciting because you are moving towards something. It's also really uncomfortable because you're still practicing, you're still learning, and you haven't yet achieved what you set out to do. And so the more people can just really accept that this is where they are in the process right now and continue to take steps forward. It's something I always notice and admire because, as I said, it's tough for me to do in whatever I'm working towards. It's something that I consciously have to engage in self-talk about, regardless of what I'm working on.
It's so interesting that you say that, Bethany, because I've had so many people say to me early on in the coaching process, I will do well with this once I see results. And I kind of cringe a little internally because I know that's not how it works. Ideally, it would work that way, but for most of us, it doesn't. We have to commit and do sometimes a lot of action before we see those specific results we're looking for. And so I encourage people to even think about other areas of their lives because I feel like this one is very different, particularly around weight loss. But if someone says, hey, I'm in a 4-year college program and it's my first semester, and if I could see results and know that I'm going to have a degree and get a job and live happily ever after, I'd finish this semester, but I'm not sure. I don't see people kind of cutting themselves off early on in some of these other big life efforts that they're engaged in. But often when it comes to weight loss, we have that belief that I can only do this if I'm seeing the results right away.
That's a really interesting reflection, especially because there are many examples, external examples to them. They've seen people who have stayed with the fasting and experienced results, and yet there is some trouble kind of translating that belief for some people to their own story.
Yeah, I think it really does require for so many of us, at first at least, a little bit of a leap of faith. I've watched other people succeed with this. It all makes sense, everything I've learned about it. I'm going to have to commit and give my body time to come into those results rather than I need to see the results first. Really big part of this process, I think.
To take it back to something more specific and concrete, I've noticed that people who have success with this are those who fast consistently. We've said that millions of times here on the podcast and other channels in TFM, but I've noticed that those who are consistent are often able to be consistent because they schedule their fasts ahead of time. So in some way, whether it's on paper, on their digital calendar, in an app, they lay out their week and they say, okay, well, I've got my, children's recital on Tuesday night. I know we're going to be going out after that. So that's not going to be a fasting day. Whatever it may be, they work around things and they literally block out their fasts ahead of time. And that also goes back to that intrapersonal boundary setting that you were talking about before, Terri, because there are people who don't want to say no to things. If certain events come up, if certain invites come their way, they don't want to say no. And I find that by putting it on a calendar, it makes them more easily able either to say, no, but how about that day when it's an eating day? Or they can say yes, but it doesn't interrupt their fasting schedule. They just go on with their schedule and they go to whatever event came up. So that's a very concrete thing that I've seen time and time again help people out.
It's funny that you talk about that, Bethany, because I have recently started experiencing this differently. Early in my fasting journey, I lived alone. I didn't spend a lot of time with other people socially. At times it was during COVID. I lived alone. I didn't see anyone. And so it didn't matter. My dogs didn't care if I ate or not. They didn't care as long as I gave them their food. And now I'm in a different situation. I'm living with other people. I'm having dinner with other people multiple nights a week. And all of a sudden, if I am on a kind of period of time where I'm fasting regularly, that changes everything. And so in the past few months, I have been to about 4 or 5 dinners where I'm not eating, but I still go because I don't want to miss that social opportunity, that important connection with friends. And I actually have one tonight. I'm fasting tonight. We have an invite for beef bourguignon dinner, and I'm not eating. I will certainly take a to-go container and bring home my serving for tomorrow. But this is new for me, even this far in my journey, to really acknowledge if I want to consistently fast, sometimes it's going to happen while I have social events. I can't always just move my fast to a different day. Sometimes I can. But if I want to really do this consistently, sometimes I need to be willing to not engage in the food portion of a program.
Terri, that's really impressive that you are able to go to those social events and not eat, both boundary-wise and just to abstain while fasting. It reminds me that what you said about bringing the takeout container reminds me that there's really not a lot of time investment, active time investment when you think about fasting. It is very different than something like training for a marathon, which is absolutely time intensive and it's active time spent just doing that. Where people often kind of miscalculate is they don't plan enough for their eating days. And so the flip side of that is that I've noticed that people who have a lot of consistency week after week after week, they plan, they spend time thinking about their grocery list, time to go to the grocery store, time to prepare food. And it gets a lot easier the more you do it. It becomes kind of more second nature. But that is, I think, the most time intensive part of this journey is the food preparation. And the cool thing about it is that if you're fasting several times a week, you don't have to do as much meal preparation. But I have noticed that the people who are successful, they do think about, okay, what am I going to break this fast with? They don't get 41 hours into a 42-hour fast and think, oh gosh, I have no groceries.
Absolutely. The other part of the consistency thing that I want to go back to, Bethany, is, again, kind of comparing it to other areas in our lives. I don't know anyone who, let's say, gets to a competitive level in a music skill or an athletic ability or something, and they say, hey, you know what? I practiced my violin twice over the past 2 months. They're not ready to compete. They're not ready to perform. They practice daily. And I think sometimes I hear people very excited about fasting, but they'll say, I fasted twice in the past 2 months. I don't know why it's not working. Consistency is what develops the skill and reaches the results that we're looking for. Not perfection, but consistency, consistent commitment to it, and following through with the actions. Again, if I want to become a good skier, I can't say, I skied twice this year. I don't know why my skills aren't improving much. That's not consistency. So thinking about how much you're committing to it, like you said, for many of us, the actual fasting part isn't much of a time commitment. The planning around it takes time and conscious thought.
Absolutely. And one thing I've heard from clients, and it always surprises me, because I hear it from coaching clients as well, is that one thing that really helps them with consistency is immersing themselves in the topic of fasting. So they get to do that a lot through the community, through our community groups and the forums. They also will seek things out. They'll listen to this podcast. They'll listen to other fasting. Maybe they'll listen to keto podcasts, whatever it is that makes them inspired. They'll listen to podcasts that tell people's stories of healing, of reversing their type 2 diabetes, of losing, 100+ pounds, whatever it is. And they'll stay in that mode. So it's not like they, fast, as you said, once a month and then kind of dip out of it. They're kind of always thinking about it. And that helps during the therapeutic phase of this process, certainly.
Yeah, it's a part of prioritizing this work. If it's going to be therapeutic, it's got to be a high priority. Otherwise, it's a hobby. Do it once in a while. But if we really want the full benefit of this, we've got to really do it as a lifestyle and as a high level of commitment. Well, Bethany, I imagine you and I could come back with some other best practices at some time in the future. I think you have given us so many great thoughts today, and I encourage everyone to think about how these fit for them and how they can work on integrating these best practices as fit for them and see if they can kind of change their trajectory in this journey by really sinking into some of these and making them work for them.
Absolutely, Terri. I'd love to come back and, I'll have more as I see more and more clients go through this journey with success. And I'm excited to see it.
Absolutely. We will definitely be back again, Bethany, and we'll cover some more of these things as well as other topics. I know we have some other episodes that we have been talking about doing. So I look forward to catching up with you again soon. And until then, everyone, happy fasting.